There are two questions that I get regularly in regards to Bitcoin, and in this video, I want to answer both of them. The first one is, how do I earn yield on my Bitcoin? And the second one is, how do I borrow against my Bitcoin? Let's get started. So the first one that I want to talk about is lending your Bitcoin and earning yield, earning interest like a bond or almost like a rental income, like a rental property or a dividend. What people want is they want to use their Bitcoin to store value for the future. And at the same time, they want to receive yield for owning that Bitcoin. So they don't have to sell their Bitcoin, and they can just use the cash flow that they're getting to support their lifestyle. But that's not really how Bitcoin works, because with Bitcoin, there are opportunity costs. And what I mean by opportunity cost here is the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen. Everything you do in life is a series of decisions. Every decision leads to a certain result. And if you make the wrong decisions, you're going to get the wrong results. In terms of Bitcoin, you need to choose. Are you going to lend your Bitcoin to earn some yield, some small amount, maybe 3 to 5%? Or are you going to hold on to your Bitcoin and not take the risks involved with lending your Bitcoin to someone else to earn a yield? So for example, people lent Bitcoin to BlockFi. They gave their Bitcoin to BlockFi. BlockFi gave them 5 to 7% yields. They got 5 to 7% for a year or two, and then they ended up with nothing because BlockFi went bankrupt. You can see here, BlockFi settles, BlockFi to commence repayments. So what their depositors were doing is they were giving them Bitcoin, they were putting them in BlockFi's wallets, and then BlockFi couldn't pay them back when they needed their Bitcoin back. Because what BlockFi was doing is they were taking people's Bitcoin and they were lending it to other people. So let's say there's a business that needs to borrow Bitcoin to start another business or to expand their operations. Maybe they'll pay BlockFi a certain amount. So let's say BlockFi is giving you 10% interest, for example. So in a way, you'll get back your Bitcoin in 10 years. The issue is that BlockFi isn't just giving you that 10% for free. They have to generate that 10%. So what they have to do is they have to lend your Bitcoin to someone else. Whoever that is, that group, that person, that company needs to pay BlockFi interest. So let's say BlockFi is paying you 10% interest. They have to generate that interest somehow. They have to have some kind of productive operation that they're running. Either they have to invest in their own business and maybe they earn money. That's how stocks work. So companies give dividends to people who have stocks. They give their shareholders a dividend because they have a productive operation and they're making enough money. So, but the dividends in the legacy financial system are 3 to 5%. With Bitcoin, the dividends are going to be 10%, 15%, because the issue with Bitcoin is the returns are so high that people aren't going to want 0.1% interest. 0.1% interest is much easier to generate than it is to generate 10%, 15%, whatever these lenders are offering. So all these lenders, if they go bankrupt, or these borrowers, if they go bankrupt, if they take your Bitcoin and they go bankrupt, you're either not going to get it back for years or you're never going to get it back again. The people from BlockFi who lent their Bitcoin to BlockFi to get a small amount of interest, they missed out on the entire run up. They gave their Bitcoin to BlockFi. BlockFi could no longer continue their operations. It isn't even just BlockFi. I'm not picking on BlockFi. There's Celsius, there's FTX, there's tons of them. And there's going to be more. Eventually, there will be ETFs that are letting you borrow against your Bitcoin ETF. You can take this risk. You can lend your Bitcoin to someone else. But if something happens to that lending chain, if somebody along the chain defaults, or if somebody doesn't pay back their loans for whatever reason, or if the price of Bitcoin drops too much and there's US dollar loans involved, then somebody's going to default, somebody's going to fall apart, and the entire chain is disrupted. So even if BlockFi isn't the one that's doing something wrong, if they lend your Bitcoin to someone, and then they lend your Bitcoin to someone, and then they lend your Bitcoin to someone, if that last person defaults, then the entire chain is disrupted. So BlockFi will be impacted directly. In the old financial system, you can borrow against your stocks, you can borrow against your real estate. The main reason why you can do that is that you know for a fact that the US government is going to keep pumping real estate prices, they're going to keep pumping stock prices. So there's no real chance of you being liquidated. In the old financial system, the stock market is a lot less volatile than something like Bitcoin. With stocks, governments will borrow money and they'll pump up the markets to ensure that the stock market doesn't drop too much, so that investor confidence doesn't go away, so that investor confidence is always there, they'll pump up the market to make sure that prices keep going up and people can keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing against their stocks, against their assets, to keep expanding the financial system. And like I said, they'll borrow money to do this. They'll use future consumption. They'll bring that future consumption to the present to ensure that stock market participants aren't hurt by massive drops. On the other hand, with Bitcoin, we have massive volatility. The price is going to go up 1,000%, then it's going to drop 80%. Then it's going to go up 2,000%, it's going to drop 80%. Then it's going to go up another 1,000% and it'll drop another 50, 60%. This will keep happening because Bitcoin is a completely free market. Market participants can buy as much Bitcoin as they want. They can sell as much Bitcoin as they want. So when Bitcoin starts dropping, you see drops getting worse and worse until finally there's some level of support. We can see here that Bitcoin's price went from $70,000 all the way down to $16,000. In this time, anybody who borrowed against their Bitcoin was very likely liquidated. So if somebody borrowed 50% against their Bitcoin, they were liquidated. If somebody borrowed 90% against their Bitcoin, they were liquidated. Anybody who borrowed money against Bitcoin, anyone who borrows money against Bitcoin has the risk of being liquidated because this market is so volatile, because it's a free market asset. We can also see the same thing with real estate. This is, of course, an old chart, 2016, but the price of real estate just keeps going up. The price of housing, detached homes, just keep going up, and they'll always keep going up because more and more money keeps being added to the economy. As more money is added to the economy, all of that money chases these goods. So houses are pretty much considered to be scarce good. They're not as common as, let's say, fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetable prices don't go up as much as house prices do. They still go up, but they don't go up as much. The reason why house prices go up so much is because everybody expects that the US government, the Canadian government, will always be a backstop for real estate prices when they're coming down. If real estate prices come down too much, the US government will pass some bill that forces prices back up, or the Federal Reserve will start decreasing interest rates to make sure that more people start borrowing money and buying houses and pumping the price of housing up. Lending and borrowing works so well in the current financial system because the US dollar can be created at will. We can see here in January 1959, there were 286 billion US dollars in existence. Today, there are 21 trillion US dollars in existence. So this number went up something like 70 times or maybe more. I don't know what the exact multiple here is, but it's gone up significantly because over time, we need to keep expanding the current financial system to make sure that there are no defaults and the entire financial system doesn't just fall apart. In March 2023, Silicon Valley Bank fell apart because they had taken so many deposits from their lenders and they had used those deposits to buy US Treasury notes. They'd used them to buy US Treasury bonds. They'd lent that money to the US government. So when those depositors wanted their money back, Silicon Valley Bank didn't have that money to pay them back. So what they had to do was they had to borrow money from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve created this bank term funding program on a Sunday. Pretty much took them a few hours to create. They created this program. They created another line of credit for Silicon Valley Bank to pay back its lenders, all of the depositors that had kept their money with Silicon Valley Bank. All of them could be paid back because of this bank term funding program. So in this current financial system, if you lend money to someone and they can't pay you back, the Federal Reserve will step in to make sure that the financial system doesn't collapse. It'll create more money. And we have problems like this, where the amount of money just keeps increasing. On a Bitcoin standard, this can't happen. We know for a fact that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. Nobody can create more Bitcoin out of thin air. So if you lend your Bitcoin to someone and they make a mistake somewhere along the line, they lend your Bitcoin to someone who can't pay them back, you're screwed. You will never get that Bitcoin back because they took a risk with your money and you were paid. You were paid 10, 15%, whatever your interest rate is, you were paid that interest for taking that risk. And now, because you wanted that 10 or 15%, you'll never get back your Bitcoin. The old financial system, the one that we're currently using, eliminates opportunity cost. It lets you borrow money against the assets that you have. So at the same time, you can hold on to these assets. You can get delayed gratification. You can get returns from holding on to these assets. You can benefit from their growth. But at the same time, you don't have to think about whether or not you want to consume. You don't have to think about having to sell those assets to buy something today. So if you wanted to buy a yacht, if you wanted to buy a nice car, if you wanted to buy a vacation home, instead of having to wait, instead of having to allow your assets to appreciate and then sell your assets, you can just borrow against your assets. You can go to the bank, you can tell them that you have a house, and the bank will give you money because the bank can create money out of thin air. The bank will give you this money so you can spend it today, but at the same time, you can take advantage of the prices of the assets that you own going up. So what it does is, like I said, it eliminates opportunity costs. You can have your cake and you can eat it too. You can have your house and you can consume whatever you want at the same time. What this does is it leads to a massive concentration of wealth. The people who own houses, there are people who own hundreds, thousands of houses. A lot of houses, they own tons of stocks and they never have to sell them because they know for a fact that if they ever want to, they can just go to the bank. The bank will lend them more money so they can use this money that they borrowed to pay for things that they want. They just have to pay the interest on that money that they borrowed. And the interest is paid by maybe the rental income on their house or the dividends that they receive from their stock. So the goal here, again, is to keep the rich rich, to give them more options to keep getting richer, and at the same time, to keep the poor poor, to keep them working for longer and longer because that's what they have to do to afford these houses. As the price of houses go up, as more of these rich people don't sell what they have, the price goes up, the available supply decreases, the demand continues to increase because people are still going to need houses to live in. There's immigration coming in. There are more and more people who want to own houses, but at the same time, these wealthy people aren't selling their houses because they don't have to. They can just borrow against the house and they can consume whatever they want to whenever they want to. So before you think about lending your Bitcoin to someone and trying to earn yield, trying to earn 5, 10, 15% returns, think about it. Is it worth it? If that financial institution goes bankrupt, you gave them your Bitcoin. Maybe they'll never be able to give you your Bitcoin back. Is that something that's worth it to you? Are you willing to earn a small amount of interest if it could mean that you could lose 100% of your Bitcoin? To me personally, it's not worth it. I would rather just sell small chunks of my Bitcoin along the way if I ever need cash flow. And I would rather just hold on to the Bitcoin that I have and not be greedy. I don't care about being able to delay gratification and getting instant gratification at the same time. I'd rather just sell tiny bits of Bitcoin, redistribute what I have, give it to other people who can maybe use it to accumulate. Maybe they have none. Maybe they want to accumulate. I'd rather just get rid of my Bitcoin, sell some of it, pay for my expenses, and get it over with, rather than being worried constantly for the rest of my life that I borrowed against this Bitcoin and now maybe I'll never get it back. So to me, it's not worth it. You need to think about it. Is it worth it to you? Are you okay with losing everything that you've saved your entire life, the best asset in the world, to just earn small amounts of yield? Is that worth it to you? Think about it before you make that decision. So back to that question, how do you earn yield on your Bitcoin? If you're taking the risk of earning 1 to 2%, you're risking your entire portfolio. You can lose every single Bitcoin that you lend. The way that you earn yield in a Bitcoin standard is you give your Bitcoin to someone else. They have full custody of it, and they can give you money. They can give you some kind of interest payments. And like I said, they don't just keep that Bitcoin. They lend it to someone else. And then that person lends it to someone else. And then that person lends it to someone else. Okay, so now let's go to the second question. The second question was, how do you borrow against your Bitcoin? It's the same principle. Instead of lending your Bitcoin, you're now borrowing it. You're now on the other side of the transaction. The issue here is that, again, you can't create Bitcoin out of thin air. So if you want to borrow against your Bitcoin, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to give your Bitcoin to some financial institution. These financial institutions aren't just going to keep your Bitcoin. They're going to lend it to other people, and they're going to try to generate even more cash flow. That's just how the financial system is designed. So what you're doing when you're borrowing against your Bitcoin is you're trying to delay gratification by getting the returns from that Bitcoin in the future, but at the same time, you're trying to get instant gratification by being able to spend your money immediately. You don't want to give up your Bitcoin, but at the same time, you want to buy whatever you want to buy today. You're trying to eliminate your opportunity costs. But on a Bitcoin standard, it doesn't work this way. If you want to borrow against your Bitcoin, you're going to have to give it to some financial institution. You are now at the mercy of this financial institution giving you your Bitcoin back at some point in the future. How do you know that that's going to happen? How do you know if that's worth the risk? How do you know that they don't have some crazy business practices where they're actually insolvent and they're just accumulating as much Bitcoin as they can so that they can get away with it? They're not planning on giving you your Bitcoin back. How do you know that that's happening in the background? How do you know that that's not happening in the background? This is what scares me about borrowing against my Bitcoin. I know a lot of people say that, in 10, 15 years, you should be able to do it because Bitcoin's price will be more stable, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think as long as the US dollar survives, the US dollar will keep losing value. People who own US dollars will keep figuring out that the US dollar is going to keep losing value. It's going to keep losing purchasing power. So more and more people are going to be gambling on Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin is going to keep going up more and more and more. The price will not get less volatile. It'll get more volatile as more people start figuring it out, as more people start gambling on it, as more people start buying it for short-term returns. The price will get more and more volatile. And if you've borrowed against your Bitcoin, if you've given it to someone, that institution could go bankrupt before giving you your Bitcoin back. Or Bitcoin's price could drop so much, and if you lose your job, if you have no way of recollateralizing your loan or giving them more Bitcoin, your Bitcoin is gone. Your Bitcoin is going to be sold, your loan is going to be liquidated, and you never get your Bitcoin back. These are the things that you have to consider when you're looking at the opportunity cost of doing something. So when you borrow against your Bitcoin, again, you're taking the risk of maybe getting 10, 15%, maybe taking 10 to 15% of the value of your Bitcoin and spending it on something, but then you could potentially lose all of your Bitcoin if the market drops, if the price of Bitcoin drops 85% overnight, and that could happen. Let's say MicroStrategy gets liquidated, or let's say Satoshi Nakamoto starts selling his or her or their 1 million Bitcoin. What happens to the price? Maybe the Bitcoin price drops to $10,000, $5,000. Maybe it drops 95% overnight and you lose everything. Is that worth it to you? To me, it wouldn't be. I wouldn't be willing to do that because it doesn't really make any sense. Why would I want to borrow against something that I know for a fact will appreciate over time? I would personally rather just increase my cash flow, work on earning more money, and if I need to, I'll just sell some of my Bitcoin if it comes to that. If I need to pay for my bills and I don't have cash flow, sell some of my Bitcoin and I'm good to go. So on the old system, like I explained, it made sense to borrow against your assets because banks and governments were working as hard as they can to make sure that these asset prices don't drop too much, because if they do, the entire financial system collapses. On a Bitcoin standard, they don't care. They're not going to back up Bitcoin. They're not going to back up Bitcoin lenders. Governments aren't going to bail them out because it doesn't benefit them in any way. When you borrow against your Bitcoin, you're taking a risk and you're all on your own. You're taking that risk. Nobody else can help you. If you lose your Bitcoin, you lose it. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to get it back. So before you try to earn yield on your Bitcoin, before you start lending your Bitcoin because you want to delay gratification and you want instant gratification at the same time, before you make these decisions, think about it. Think about the potential of Bitcoin's price dropping 70, 80, 90% overnight. Think about the lender maybe collapsing and you never getting your Bitcoin back. These are very important things to consider. And if you're not considering them, then you're not thinking about the opportunity cost. On a Bitcoin standard, there will always be opportunity costs, and you need to make sure you pay attention to them. If you found value in this content, make sure you leave a thumbs up or a comment down below. And if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, make sure you watch the video on your screen.